many taxes to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like kind of optimistic, at least in the next iteration. I think it'll probably be better.
Mm-hmm.
It's just we don't know to what extent.
All right, well, it's all federal legislators out there. Let's do it for the kids. How about? Let's get them some more money for school supplies. Pencils, rulers. These are great things for children.
Yeah.
And all of that and more can be bought with a child tax credit.
Yeah, of course.
All right, well, I didn't realize this is going to turn into a PSA for the child tax credit, but I'm not mad at it. All right, Alexia, thank you so much for joining us today. It was great to hear about all your research, and your article is currently live on the Chicago Policy Review website if anyone wants to go check it out.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and letting me talk about tax policy on an education podcast.
We try our best. All right, bye-bye. Lastly, for today, we have School Days, where we interview a guest about their own personal educational journey, the schools they went to, the experiences they had, and how that impacts where they are now. Today in School Days, we are joined by Stephen Fowler, a student at the University of Chicago's Harris School of Public Policy. Stephen grew up in Ratoath, Ireland, and shares with us his experiences in primary and secondary school. Stephen, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
So what was your first formal education experience?
My first formal education experience. So I'm from like a small town in Ireland. So the school I went to was like the only school in our town. So I guess like my first day of school, I just remember all the other kids crying. And at that time, like we start school at 5. And the one kind of like very close friend I had at 5 years old was actually in my class. So I was delighted, but everyone else seemed pretty sad about it.
It was so everyone, did kind of everyone in your town go to the same school?
Yeah, pretty much. In Ireland, pretty much all schools, primary schools especially, are public.
Mm-hmm.
And then also they tend to have like a Catholic bias, or they, run by a Catholic order. So that included my school. And pretty much everybody will go to their local school, with the exception of maybe people who are from a different religion, or maybe people who are going to pay to go to private school. But that's very rare, especially in primary.
Mm-hmm. So you said the public schools are sometimes run by a religious institution?
Yeah, so for secondary school, it's a bit less, but for primary school, pretty much all schools are run by some sort of either like the bishop in the local parish, or some sort of like Catholic order generally.
Okay, is there a secular public school system?
There is. At primary school, it's I think like over 90% Catholic, but then when you get to secondary school, like I went to multi-denominational, so like a secular secondary school. So once you get to secondary school level, it's kind of like more split, but generally again, it's Catholic dominated.
Yeah, just by population.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about this primary school. Was it a big school, small school? What was like the building like?
Yes, it was the only primary school in the town, and at the town that I live in, around the time that I was 5 years old, the town was expanding rapidly. So I grew up like very close to Dublin City, and it's kind of on the commuter belt. So around, say, the 90s up to the early 2000s, there was like a huge population growth. So even though the town had maybe like 7,000 people around that time, there was like 1,000 in the primary school, 1,000 children.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so it was the only school in the town. All the kids went there pretty much. And it was a pretty nice school. So it did have that Catholic ethos. So we said prayers at the start of the day and the end of the day. But it was a great school. And the town I live in is, I'd say, pretty ordinary. It's not like extremely high income or extremely low income. So I had a really great time. Like the teachers were excellent, and we had like every opportunity given to us that was possible.
Were the teachers mostly had been there for a long time, or was there kind of like a lot of churn with new teachers coming in and teachers leaving?
And because of the population growth in primary school, like most of the teachers were quite young. But the interesting thing is our principal, I think, was back in this, like at the time I went, so we're talking early 2000s, the principal had been around since the 70s. So at one point, he was like the youngest principal in Ireland. But he was a great principal. And the teachers, have said, because they were younger, like very motivated. And I was lucky to go to that school.
Yeah, you don't stick around that long if you're not that good of a principal from what I know. And what do you remember about the classes? Were there any classes that stuck out, or any subjects that you feel were kind of taught particularly well?
So in Ireland, primary school is from 5 years old to 12 years old. And you just have one teacher every single year. Like there's no separate classes at that age. So the kind of the core we learn is just like your English. We also learn the Irish language, our own national language, which isn't widely spoken, but every child has to learn it. Maths. Then we do a little bit about history, and then religion. And then also like the religion be mostly focused on kind of Catholic faith, but we learn about some other religions too. And then a little bit about like geography and whatnot, and science too. So what we learned was really interesting at school. Like I love school. Probably my favorite subject was like PE, physical education, but no, it was really enjoyable to be at the school, and I would say I got an excellent education at primary.
Mm-hmm. And I'm always interested in kind of the history, obviously, inside of the U.S., but outside of the U.S. Within the United States, a lot of different schools teach history very differently. And obviously outside of the U.S., I'm assuming it's much different than even inside the U.S. But so what was the kind of history that y'all focused on?
Yeah, so in Ireland, like we'd focus a lot on Irish history, but when you're at primary level, you don't delve into it very much. Like we just do the basics of like Irish history. Of course, we learn about like, ancient Rome, ancient Egypt, like maybe a very basic understanding of the Second World War and things like that. And so once you get into secondary, you learn a bit more. And then at the very end of secondary school, so that's like you do secondary from say 13 years old to 18. So from about 15 to 18, you can choose history as a subject, and then you go a lot more in detail to say, like I learned about the Cold War and much greater detail on the Second World War, like Irish independence, and the civil rights movements, things like that. So it gets like a lot more in detail once you go to secondary school.
Mm-hmm. So the secondary school you went to, was it just kind of like everyone from your primary school went to that secondary school?
Yeah, pretty much. The thing with my secondary school is, for the primary school in the small town, we had one, but then some of even smaller towns and almost rural catchment areas, they would have had their own primary schools. So the difference was when we went to secondary school, everyone from my school went there, but then also like lots of kids from the rural areas went in. And also one thing that our school had was like a unit to help children with autism. So like a lot of the students in our school had autism. So the catchment area for that as well meant we'd have a lot of students coming in from even further away from maybe the catchment area to take advantage of that service. So in secondary school, it was a much wider catchment area, but I was lucky to live in the town that actually had the school.
Yeah. So how big was the school? How big was your graduating class? You remember?
The overall school population, I think, was like just over 1,000, so like 1,100 or 1,200. I remember my graduating class was over 200, but that was kind of because of that population growth. So I think it's slightly smaller now, but like around 1,000.
In the boom years, sounds like your grade was.
Oh yeah, and that was the boom years for Ireland. So like the early 2000s, the economy like took off, like home ownership, like people were moving into the town that I was in because it was near Dublin. But now it's kind of slowed down a little bit and things have changed. So my town hasn't grown massively like it was back in the early 2000s.
Okay. So the secondary school, what was that like? Was it similar where there's, people who had been there for a while, like an old principal, or was it different?
No. So the secondaries that I went to, I think when I went there, it was the 6th year it was open, which meant that the students who were graduating that year, I think were the first to graduate. So every single teacher at that school was super young. I mean, they were either starting off or like just a couple of years in the job, which was actually brilliant because they were so motivated. Like we learned like lots of different kind of teaching styles and teaching techniques. So I just missed out on it. But the year younger than me, they actually got iPads, like learn on iPads instead of books. And like our teachers were big on IT. We're very lucky. Like everything was cutting edge. Our principal, who was, of course, like had to be a new principal because this school is only 6 years old, was very big for signing up to every initiative that the government put out. So we were like, kind of like I want to say like a test school for a lot of these government initiatives, which was probably a good thing. So
yeah, just give us everything, just whatever it is, every email, just send it over. we'll make use of it.
Oh yeah, like every kind of government initiative was tested on us.
Did you, since it was such a new school, did you notice any changes in your time there?
The benefit is because the school was so new and the teachers so young, that was great. The only thing is they were also expanding at the same time. So I actually missed out on, say, the school extensions and stuff that kind of finished once I ended school. But other than that, like the facilities were excellent. I should say it was a public school, multi-denominational. But even though it was a public school, I would say it's probably as good as you're going to get with a public school. Like the opportunities we had were amazing. We did really good school trips. Like we signed up for every kind of competition. Like I did all the like Young Scientist of the Year, Young Economist of the Year when I was at school. Like the teachers were super motivated as well. So I got an excellent education at that school. Like for a public school, I mean, I would almost say it was on like a private school level.
Mm-hmm. So what other kind of extracurriculars did y'all have outside of the classroom?
Yeah, so in primary school, we just had like sports for extracurriculars. But then in secondary school, I mean, because the teachers, again, were like so motivated, there was like every single thing you could possibly sign up for. Like they had an American football team, which doesn't sound like much, but in Ireland, like I think there was like 3 other schools.
I know. Who did y'all play?
I think they were all like private schools as well, which says something. We also had a cricket team at one point, and the only reason that ended is because like none of the students wanted to play cricket. But again, like they would have just been playing private schools. We had like any kind of sport you wanted to play. We had like a debating team that I was on. That we went to different events. We signed up for the Young Scientist, the Young Economist. I mean, like any kind of extracurricular, like we had like a folk music group. There was all sorts of things. So like I was very involved, like particularly the more academic extracurriculars, but we had everything. Like we also had a library in the school, which was totally, these donated books by the parents, but it was an excellent library. Again, like nobody really used it because nobody wanted to read more books, but I used it a few times, and like it was amazing to be at that school, and everything was brand new too.
Mm-hmm. And are there any classes that stood out in your time there?
So in secondary school, you start like every day you go to different teachers to learn the different subjects. So again, you have the core, which is your English, Irish, and maths. Then at the start of secondary school, there's like a few other subjects that are mandatory. Say geography, history. You have to pick one language, so I picked French. But then once you get towards the end of secondary school, you get to pick the different subjects. So you can pick history. You can pick like kind of, I want to call it like an architecture class, like technical graphics. You can pick political CSP, that's like a political subject. So I focus mostly on humanities, like history and geography. And I had a few like favorite teachers. Like probably my favorite teacher was an economics teacher. So I did the Young Economist of the Year because he was like very motivated. He was trying to encourage me to do it. We also had like a really good Irish and history teacher. We were very lucky that all these teachers were kind of almost on our level because they were so young, but they were really motivated, and they just encouraged us to get involved with everything. So we were very lucky.
That's great. And what about so near the end? Was there kind of expectation that most students who graduated were going off to university afterwards?
I would say probably most. So then in Ireland, you either go to university, you can do a PLC, which is kind of like a course to get you into university. You can go into like an apprenticeship, like a trade, or you can just, just do your own thing. So I guess the assumption was that most people, or at least like 50%, are going to go on to some sort of third level course. Then on top of that, we've had like guidance counselors. So it was a multi-denominational school. So we've had a chaplain as well, who was like a Catholic priest, but again, like would have done all sorts of kind of chaplaincy, like for different faiths. And then for the school advice, like the guidance counselors, they did a bit of work with us. Like one of the problems was, I said, there was 200 people in the year. So it was only so individual. Like there's only so much they can do when there's 200 students. But they give you a bit of advice. Like I was lucky that I kind of knew what I wanted to do from a very young age. So I didn't really need any guidance counselors to help me. But that I guess that resource was there if you needed it.
Yeah, so there wasn't a big like college preparatory curriculum that they sent everyone with?
A little bit of that. We also, the school, because it was, they were so like they work so hard to give us different opportunities and extracurriculars. Sometimes they bring in, I want to say like ambassadors, say from the universities. So like I think we had one person from a third level course who basically like ran the university. I want to say like maybe the dean at one of these kind of PLC courses that get you prepared to go to university, who came in and talked to us. We also had like a few people from outreach from some of the Irish universities come to our school. And I guess like, again, as I said, like I knew what I wanted to do, but for the people who didn't, I think that was good that they had these representatives from the universities come in and kind of explain what university life is like and what kind of options there are to go into third level.
Yeah. What does the college application process or like application to university look like in Ireland?
Yeah, so in Ireland, it's almost totally blind in that you do kind of your final exams. It's called a leaving certificate. You get